Welcome back to my Emporium. On this side I have the Tomos Puch Special Mark 1, and on this side I have the Tomos Puch Special Mark 2. So the Mark 1 has a Maxi barrel and cylinder head. It's also got a Maxi ignition system, and it's got a Delorto SHA 1515 carb on it, and it's running a modified A3 exhaust. It could be a better exhaust. I came about this kind of combination purely by accident. So I was looking for a better cylinder head for my Tomos A3, and I was wandering around Ross White Auto Jumble one Saturday morning, many years ago, and I came across a Puch Maxi one, and it wasn't much, it was just a couple of quid. But I noticed that it had a shallower combustion chamber, which in my mind meant it had higher compression than the A3 one. So I took a gamble on it, using an educated guess that they'd used the same PCD for the Maxi and the A3 as they did on the older versions that Tomos used to make under license. And sure enough, when I got it home, actually fitted on the A3 barrel, and on a little test ride I noticed it did have a little bit more power. Result. So the next year I'm at Ross White again, and I come across a Maxi barrel, and the first thing I noticed is they're alloy, so they're a lot lighter than the A3 barrel, and also inlet port is much bigger and it goes straight in, and also the transfer ports are a bit bigger because they don't have an inner wall. They actually use the piston as the inner wall, which kind of increases their size. Exhaust ports are about the same size as the A3 though. One slight problem. The Maxi engine has a horizontal barrel like that, whereas the A3 engine has an angled barrel like this, which meant I couldn't put this onto the A3 bottom end because the stock Maxi inlet manifold would point back towards the engine. Same goes to the exhaust. The exhaust would actually fit, but it would actually point down into the ground. So I had to make a one-off manifold, and I had to cut and re-weld the exhaust mounting flange. As for any performance improvements, I did notice it had a bit more torque on hills. Whether this is because the slight increase in porting, better heat dissipation because of it being alloy, not cast iron, or even just power to weight ratio because it's lighter, I can't say for sure. One thing I did have to do though was I had to drill and tap this hole for the decompressor and put a grub screw in, because even though I was using a Maxi head that didn't have the decompressor valve fitted, I didn't want exhaust gases coming back up through there and trying to lift the cylinder head off. So if you fancy rummaging through an auto jumble, looking for parts to build your own Frankenstein Tomos engine, I advise taking with you an A3 and A35 rear sprocket, and that's because the PCD is exactly the same as the PCD used for the cylinder studs. So if you look, they actually line up. So if you take a sprocket with you, you find a head that you're unsure of. If the sprocket lines up with the holes in the head, then you know that will fit an A3. Same goes to the barrel. Find a barrel that you quite like the look of, and that will fit an A3. Now, one thing to be wary of is the height of the barrel. Ideally, they need to be the same height to keep the port timings about the same. You can shim them if there's a slight difference, but too much, and you're going to need some machining done. So the Mark 1 was based on a lightened A3 frame. For the Mark 2, I wanted to reduce the weight even further, and so I used a frame off a Puch Magnum X. Okay, so there's actually a playlist for the Mark 2, so if you want to find out how the frame was adapted to fit all the A3 running gear, I'd advise watching that. It'll make a bit more sense. This is just purely about the engine. Now, fitting this engine to this frame is giving me much more space here, so it isn't affected by the same issue you have with the Mark 1, which if you ever fit a big bore kit to a Tomos, you'll find that you'll have to use a longer manifold put a bigger carb outside the frame. On this, I haven't got that issue because there's more space here. Same goes for the head and barrel. There's more space for a barrel with more finning, which is better cooling. And I was going to go for the Magnum X one, which ironically would have been fitted to the engine that's supposed to go with this frame. But I've decided not to do that. I've actually come up with something different. So back in 2021, I think it was after the second lockdown, I had this idea about making performance cylinder head for my Tomos A3 that had two spark plugs. The reasoning for this was that a two-stroke loses a certain amount of unburnt fuel into the exhaust system. So if I could ensure that I burnt as much fuel as possible by having two spark plugs, I'd increase the efficiency and also the power. So I took the Maxi cylinder head that had the damaged spark plug hole, and I machined up an aluminium kind of bung on the lathe that was an interference fit in the hole. So I then needed to find somebody that could do all the alloy welding for me because I lacked the ability and the equipment to do that at home. And I managed to find someone locally that did repairs on aluminium trailer bodies. When I dropped off his workshop, it just so happened he also did repairs on vintage cylinder heads for things like Bentleys. So he was quite used to working on castings of unknown quality. And he did a really good job. He welded the bung in on the combustion chamber side, as well as on the top side. He also built this area up as well to allow me to sort of file it flat, which made drilling and tapping the holes to the spark plugs much easier. And for the spark plugs, I'm having to use two 10mm ones because you can't get two 14mm ones in the combustion chamber. And for the barrel, I'm going to be using the Maxi one again, but this time I'm going to be making the inlet port bigger because there is room to do that. And I'm also going to be doing the same with the transfer ports again. I can actually make them a bit wider, and also the exhaust port. And being alloy, it's much easier to do than the cast iron A3 ones, which you may have seen in a previous video. So, not to state the obvious, but the ignition system on a Tomos is only designed to run one spark plug, and I'm going to run two. So my options are either a dual output ignition coil, like you find on outboard engines or multi-cylinder motorcycles nowadays. The problem I have with that is they tend to be CDI-based ignition systems that are powered via a battery, so I have a constant voltage supply. I'm going to be using a magneto-based system, and so that voltage is going to vary. So I'm not sure how well that's going to work. I have looked into kind of the resistance values of these coils to see if they match up what I've got with the stock ones, but I don't really want to kind of go and invest in a coil that if it doesn't work. I have, however, tried running two OEM coils off one source coil. It does actually work, although I really want to try for a better spark. Okay, so you're probably thinking, why am I going to all this potch when I just bought an aftermarket big ball syndicate onto it and have instant power? It's not what these bikes are about. I'm really interested in the kind of specials of yesteryear where people took a frame from one manufacturer, engine from somebody else, used their ingenuity and abilities to get a bit more power out of it. And, that's what they did because they didn't have aftermarket parts, and neither did they have the money to buy those parts. I'm kind of in the same position as I get older. My money's better spent on other things, unfortunately. And so and plus I'm quite interested in actually making stuff work and just bolting stuff on. So if you like that, then great. Remember to press that little like button down there if you enjoyed the video. If not, no big deal. Thank you for subscribing if you have done so recently. It's much appreciated. And I'll see you all again soon. Take care. I really need to get this thing finished.